This is one of my favorite workshops to put out because I think it's the basis for everything we do within job search. It should be your foundational work you do before you create your resume, before you apply for jobs, before you do just about anything in your job search. And the reason for that is when we're in job search, we are promoting, we're marketing our skills to employers. And many of us, myself included, have a hard time to identify what skills we bring from our prior employment or our schooling or our experience. We may say that I've been a welder or I've been a trainer, but what does that mean to your intended audience? They're letting you know that you have that they have some needs. They have some needs that you need to fill. And that's not your job history. That's the skills you developed during your work at previous employers. So that's why we're going to be talking about that today. So some of this, it will be interactive. Some of the slides will look like questions, but it's kind of silly to ask some of these questions. So what I'm going to do is let you know when to put your answer into the chat box and when I'm just kind of giving you information. First off, a skill is anything you can do. And by anything you can do, I don't mean like breathing or walking. I mean any skill you could bring to an employer. Now, the first question I have for you today is, how many skills do you think the average person has? So just into the chat box, there's no wrong answer for this, by the way, so don't worry, no one's going to be made fun of or anything like that. Just put the number of skills you think the average person has. All right, many people have found the chat box. 12, 7, 6, dozens, 50, 8, 10, 100. Ooh, someone has 800 possibly. Endless. Okay, so I got a lot of great answers here. This was shocking to me when I looked at this for the first time, because like many people, I would undersell what I could bring to an employer. The average person, not someone with advanced degrees and 40 years of experience, has between 500 and 800 skills that they have before they even start a new job. These are things that we bring to a new job. Now, obviously, not all of these are relatable to the new job. There's many things that each of us can do that many employers couldn't care less if we can do, but that doesn't matter. At this stage, what we're trying to do is identify the possibilities. We don't want to limit ourselves. I'm not saying anyone's going to get a page of 500 to 800 skill sets, but I'm hoping that this gives you an idea that we have more than maybe we had assumed originally. Because the average person, if I was to ask you to put on a piece of paper, how many skills do you have? They would say 10, which is the number that a lot of people come up with. And if I ask someone in a live situation to, okay, now write out those 10 skills, they have a hard time because it's not something we generally think of. So I'll give you an example, two examples. One, I talked about welding. So if I were to ask somebody at an interview, I said, okay, what can you bring to this job? They say, well, I'm a really experienced welder. That's a profession. That's a category that is not breaking it down into its component parts. So I'm not a welder, and I'm probably embarrassing myself by saying these things, but I'll throw out some terms. There's MIG welding, TIG welding, cast iron, aluminum, settling torch, plasma cutter. Those are the skills that allow you to be a welder, and not everyone has the same things. So we often assume someone's going to know what we bring to a job by the title of the job we put on a resume, or when we told them I was a welder. So we need to break it down for ourselves so we know how we can meet their needs. Because in the job posting, they're going to tell you what they need. And we need to be able to respond specifically to those needs, not generally. So another example, Lisa and I both are trainers. We train people in a variety of topics. When I tell someone I'm a trainer, and this actually happened to me once, I get the response of, oh, so you work in a gym. I do not work in a gym. I would be horrible working at a gym. I train people on workshops, on computer skills, on interviewing. So don't let other people's definition of a term limit their understanding of what you can offer. So let's think about trainer. What does a trainer do? In my case, a trainer is a public speaker. A trainer is someone who develops curriculum. A trainer is someone who overcomes objections. There's a lot of things that are sellable points to a multitude of jobs once I break it down. So even though someone might not need a trainer for that job, they may need someone who's comfortable with public speaking or comfortable with technology, or maybe could write a instruction manual. So the idea here is the skills that we have may not be a perfect fit for an employer. I mean, the positions we had may not be a perfect fit, but many of the skills we developed during our previous positions might transfer. Okay. So the reason this is important is the percentage of people who cannot identify, sell, or prove their skills during an interview sits at about 80%. I've interviewed hundreds of people over the years, and I can attest to the fact that 80% is low. I think that most people come in just assuming that they've looked at their resume and they know what they bring to this job. They haven't thought about, how do I sell my skills? Now, the 80% I like, though, because if you think about it, in many cases, employers will interview, let's just say 5 people. So I interview 5 people for a job, and I only hire one of them. That means there's a 20% success rate and a 80% failure rate. That does not mean that those other 4 people could not have done the job. Because remember, at interview, you're not doing the job, you're telling me about it. That's why we interview. And so if you identify your skills and then attempt to sell them or make the connection to the needs, you're going to get a chance to actually do the job. And that's why we never know if the best person for the job gets hired. It's just the person who markets themselves the best, who gets through the interview. And you may not be good at interviews. Many people aren't. But as an employer, when I see someone who is maybe struggling with the interview but has a plan, that's okay. It's okay to be nervous in an interview as long as you're prepared. I've hired people that have had to walk out of the room because they had a panic attack during the interview. Didn't bother me because I wasn't hiring them to interview. I was hiring them to do the job that I was interviewing for. They came back in, which was very brave of them. They got through the interview and I hired them. It was the best hire I'd ever had. So don't give up on yourself in an interview. Have a plan going in, and that plan is to sell your skills in relation to the needs of the employer. So we develop skills through a variety of methods. We do it through all of the above, by the way, and that's usually the answer to these questions is when you have an all the above option. But they are ordered in a way that makes a little sense. The most important is work experience. Employers are very keen on people bringing prior work experience in a field. Now, when we just come out of an educational institution, maybe we just graduated with a degree in something that we're trying to now get work for, then that's the most relevant in some cases. But if you have experience in the field, if you've worked for a number of years doing similar work, this is going to be the most important. That does not mean it's the only thing you can pull skills from. We pull it from our education, obviously, related volunteer work. And by related, I mean, we don't have to put volunteer work on our resume. We don't have to talk about it in an interview. Often people do because it's relevant. The mistake some people make is they bring up irrelevant volunteer work, just thinking that, hey, they need to see my volunteer work. So I volunteer for this organization and this organization and this organization. As an employer, I see someone who's that overcommitted to things outside of work, sometimes it makes me pause. So always ask yourself, are the things I'm talking about adding value to this presentation? Are they showing that I can do this work? Does it overcome objections to maybe gaps in work history or unrelated work history? So there are reasons to bring volunteer work in, but there are some reasons not to. So you can consider that on a case-by-case basis. Some people are just naturally good at socializing with people, with networking. You hear that term a lot, and we do bring skills from that. These other two I'm going to kind of group, hobbies and sports. if you have relevant work history and consistent work history, you don't have to go too much further than that. Now, if your hobbies show something your work history doesn't, and there's some relatable skill sets, you can sometimes bring them in. The mistake I've seen people make, and this is more my opinion, I guess, is they want to show an employer that they're a well-rounded, interesting person. People coming out of college will hear this from counselors because in many cases they don't have as much work history as someone who maybe is in their 40s or 50s and has worked for a couple of decades. So they'll say, well, to fill out your resume and show that you have interesting, aspects to your life, you can put in that you are on the lacrosse team or that you did this. I'm not saying that's a horrible thing to do. I'm just saying that we only have so much space on a resume and so much time in an interview that we don't want to kind of off track things that aren't filling a need. So, by the way, I forgot to mention this. When there are questions in the chat box, Lisa will turn on her video, and that's my cue to see that there are questions, and we'll take a couple when she does that. So the skills that are most important to employers, and I'm going to specify that at interview especially, these types of skills are most important to employers, are soft skills. So in my example of welder, you might think of, well, what does customer service and team playing and all those types of things have to do with welding? That's a hard skill. Well, here's why. Especially at interview, if you're at an interview, you're alongside other people that on paper are meeting at least the minimum qualifications of the job. So they've all, put out an application, put together a resume that at least leads an employer to think that if I hired this person, they could meet the minimum qualifications. So let's put that off to the side. The hard skills are a given in a way. They're still going to ask about them. They're still going to ask you questions. But I have found most of the questions I'm asked in an interview are soft skill questions. Those questions like, give me a situation in which you dealt with an angry customer. That has nothing to do with welding, but welders weld for customers, or they have to deal with coworkers who deal with customers. That's internal customer service. So at interview, we're really looking at, will you fit in with what the company needs? And by the way, not everyone, they're not looking for everyone who, is exactly the same as them. That's not the idea. It's, will you fit in with the customers you serve and the ideas or the culture of the business? Will you adapt? Will you learn? One of the things I bring up in every interview is my ability to adapt, because I'm a trainer. And in many cases, I'm training people on a new concept, on a new computer program, a new law, and people are generally reluctant to accept change because it's scary. And if you tell an employer that you adapt, that you've learned a new system, that you've got on board with a new way of doing things at a past employer, it tells them that maybe you won't be someone who will resist change, because change is constant. And so that is something I work into every single interview I do, those soft skills of adapting and learning. The reason I bring this up is these are the hardest skills to give examples for. So if I were to ask, give me an example when you've provided excellent customer service. That's one of the easier ones, but still difficult for many people. Soft skills aren't as tangible. They're not as, okay, I welded 20 slots, or I trained 50 workshops that had 25 people in each workshop. Those are hard and fast numbers. Soft skills are about how you deal with people, and coming up with those examples takes more time. So I did see some questions, and one of them came to me privately. Make sure you put your questions out to all panelists. I don't always catch the chat. There is a recording being made of this. It will be put on YouTube, and I will be sending the link out to everybody by the end of the day tomorrow. So Identifying your skills helps you in your job search by, one, proving your abilities to potential employers. I mean, that's the whole idea of the whole process we go through in applying, putting out a resume, doing an interview, is to prove your abilities to potential employers. It really helps you, the resume write itself, and complete applications. So when I said, taking a blank piece of paper and writing down as many skills as you could think of, that's the first step. Once you have written down those skills, then you look at a job app posting and you circle the skills that they need. And then don't get too hung up on if the way you define a skill and the way they define the skill is the exact same language. If you can honestly say, this is pretty much the same thing as this. So, and the example of training, many people call a trainer a facilitator or an educator. So if they're looking for a facilitator and I call myself a trainer, guess what? Now I'm a facilitator. You can go too far with that, obviously, as long as you're being honest. A lot of jobs have different titles that are basically the same thing. Once you've identified those skills, the hard part is coming up with examples of how you've been successful with that skill, ideally within an employment situation. Those skill statements. We'll be talking about how to put some of those together as we go along here today. And then it also helps you for selling your qualifications in an interview. There is a difference between how we write things and how we say things. Writing something on a resume is one thing, but now responding to a question about that skill in an interview requires some preparation. And I have to say that the number one issue I have found in assisting people in job search, and I've been doing this for about 20 years, is people understand applications. They get help with that. People understand that, a resume has to be put together in a nice way. Many people get to the interview and just wing it. And at that point, I'm saying you can separate yourself from the competition simply by practicing, by, doing a mock interview, by doing, recording yourself on your phone and answering questions. I know it's awkward. Answering questions that maybe you look up on the internet, common interview questions, and then practicing relating your skills to those questions. In an interview, it's really important to have a game plan. And my game plan is always based on the job posting. What do they need to know about me? What are the 5 things they need to know about me? What are 5 skills that are going to get me this job if I effectively market them? And through the questions they ask, I can always talk about those skills. Or at the end, when they say, do you have any questions for us? It hasn't come up. I say, I do have a couple of questions, but there was one thing I did want to add. And then I talk about that relatable skill. Take control of your job search in making sure that your best qualities are being marketed. And in an interview, it's a give and take. Even though it seems like they have all the power, it's not always true. I see there's a question. Lisa?
Actually, there's a couple comments I thought I'd run by before we get too far away from them. There's a couple comments on the welding. And so one of the participants said, if any of you are welders, you are in demand. You might want to check the job board of the Manufacturing Alliance. Manufacturing companies are having trouble finding qualified production workers. And then we had someone else say that Thurn Inc. or Incorporated in Winona needs welders. Now, those are the comments, but I just want to say something about the skills because there's a couple questions about them, Art. So I'll just very quickly, one person had said, to demonstrate your soft skills, people skills, you should have a story about a specific situation. What the challenges or situation was and how you successfully navigate the situation. For example, you might have to work with a challenging coworker and how you successfully doing that and what you did. Now that was a comment, but actually I wanted to go back up to one person question. I've been under the impression that a resume's main purpose is to get the interview and not to show your main body of work as a professional. So I'll let you go from there.
So, yeah, no, you're exactly right as far as the, kind of what we call the star stories about developing a situation that describes how you were successful dealing with soft skills. I'll be sending some follow-up information that has some worksheets on how to effectively do that. I'll be giving you some examples here. As far as the resume, The resume, if you go to what the commenter was talking about, to the ultimate example of that, what you would be doing is just putting your job history. Just I worked here from this date to this date. I worked here from this date to this date. And I've seen resumes like that. That's important to have dates. It's important to have job history. Unless you're responding specific to the needs of the job posting, they're not going to bring you on generally to the job interview. There's been, I've seen the other side of that, where people talk just about skills and no work history, and they're not going to interview you in many cases in that way either. Now, we can't tell the whole story in a resume. A resume is a teaser. A resume gives you here's a preview of coming attractions. So hit the high points. You know, if there are things that they mention several times or are required in a job posting, make sure that you're listing your ability or similar experience to doing something like that. But yeah, you can't tell your whole story in a resume. That would create, for all of us, you know, a 10-page resume. And I'm a big believer in a 1 to 2-page resume. So you just hit the high points. All right, so we're going to talk about the different types of skills. There are 3 types. Don't get too hung up by the definitions of these, because it's, I don't know, it confuses the subject in some cases. But the soft skills we talked about are skills you use to get along with others and self-management. You know, are you timely? Are you efficient? Are you organized? You know, all of those things. If someone's very good at all those things, I'll train them into the job. You know, that's why they ask so many questions about soft skills in an interview is, you know, if I get the right person, I'll train them into the job, because I'm going to have to train you anyways. Even if you've done similar work for someone else, we have our own way of doing things. I want to see how well you get along, how well you interact. And that's why soft skills are so important. Now, job-specific skills obviously are important also. You're not going to put me on the behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler unless I've got a Class C license, unless I have over-the-road experience. That's extremely important too. But you don't do one without the other. You have to bring both. And transferable skills are just those skills that we use in many different kinds of jobs. In many cases, they're soft skills that transfer from one industry to another, like public speaking, like customer service. The challenge a lot of job seekers struggle with is when they're reinventing themselves. If the job or industry that they were in before is no longer available to them, they say, well, I don't want to go back to school. How do I start a new career without reskilling? The first thing you have to ask yourself is, are there transferable skills? What specifically would I have to do to become relevant to this industry? Maybe I already am. You know, so for example, if you were in retail and you wanted to go into healthcare, well, a front desk person at a healthcare facility has many of the same skill sets as someone in retail. Now, there's a specific lingo. There's maybe the additional skill set would be medical terminology and human anatomy. So you can speak the same lingo as these customers, but you're not required to take anyone's blood pressure or do blood draws. It's just a different setting for many of the same skills. I'll be sending everyone a link to a skills assessment survey that we have on the careerforcemn.com, and that's a good place to start. Before we go on to further, Lisa, there's another question?
Yeah, actually I have 2. One is, should I mention my soft skills in the cover letter? And the other, which skills are more important for employers?
Okay, so for the cover letter, how important are the soft skills to that position? Meaning, have they been identified within the job posting? Some job postings are heavy on hard skills or job skills, and some will talk more about soft skills. So that's kind of it depends, like on everything in job search. I would always bring up at least one or work it within. So if I'm going to talk about maybe that I am a landscape person, I'm going to work my customer service into the story I tell about putting together a brick wall for a customer. You know, statements can be multi-purpose. They can bring in soft skills and job specific skills. The other question, I'm sorry, Lisa, could you remind me what the other question was?
Sure. Didn't mean to throw two at you. Which
It's all right.
skills are more important for employers?
So, like I said, at interview, the focus, I would say 75% is going to be on soft skills. Doesn't mean one's more important than the other, but just at the time they're brought up, it seems to be at interview, they talk more about soft skills. In a resume and a cover letter, we talk a lot more about job-specific skills, but we still put soft skills in there. Now, that doesn't mean that a specific employer may have a job posting that is all about the hard job skills. It's whatever's most important to that employer. So looking specifically at each job posting will tell you what's more important to them during that period of, or that section of your job hunt. And I've seen wildly different approaches from employers. So just kind of take that. People get scared when I say that, you have to write a new resume for every job you apply for. I will stand behind that. I think you should. I'll take the new word out of it. I will say a specific resume. And that just means that every employer will have slightly different asks of an applicant. It may be the same exact job type. Let's say Costco and Sam's Club. It may be a similar industry, similar type of employer, but they're going to ask for different things based on the culture of their business and how things are set up. So don't think you can use the same exact resume to apply to both. Look at the job posting, use different words, slightly adjust. Sometimes it's a couple words here or there. Sometimes it's changing from maybe a chronological resume to more of a skill-based or combination resume. There are many different approaches, but always let the job posting drive the direction you take. So the importance of skills identification. Bill Gates, well, I'd be hesitant to, he's in the news a lot lately, but he once said, "My people have the confidence of their convictions and they know their skills." People who know their skills are more valuable to employers. They're more likely to pitch in when needed. When you get a job, when I get a job, I always think of how can I keep this job? How can I be promoted within this job? If you do the minimum amount within every job, you'll probably stay employed, but you're not going to be as valuable as someone who has identified and made available other skills. And when you talk about that within a interview, you don't want to talk about irrelevant skills. You don't want to talk about things you're just proud of. But if you can value add, if you can bring up, one of the other things I've been able to do throughout my career is implement change or overcome difficult customers' objections. Those are the types of skills that you've identified that you're really good at that can push an employer one way or another. Remember I said at interview, everyone at least meets the minimum qualifications. How are you going to tip the scales in your favor? And skills identification has a lot to do with that. So consider anything. You don't want to limit yourself. Don't get hung up on the definition. You can include skills you're just, but just honest about that. I've taught Excel. It's my favorite thing to teach, by the way, Excel for many, many years. And I would consider myself proficient at Excel. Not knowing everything, because I'll never know everything, but I know a decent amount, and I would say I'm proficient. I have trained someone for 6 hours who uses that same definition. They'll say they're proficient in Excel when they've had 6 hours of training. So be very specific about what level or what path you're taking. I'm currently taking a course online in Excel and very excited about the options that filtered lists and pivot tables will give me in my employment. That tells an employer that you're actively pursuing a skill that is of need to them and what the payoff will be. You'll have these skills to bring in. I don't like speaking in general terms like I'm excellent at something or proficient, because that is too, it doesn't define the skill enough. And obviously you don't want to oversell a qualification, because that's not being honest. All right. Let's go on. So I want to pause at this time just for a checkpoint. Looks like Lisa has a question or two.
I do. First of all, I just want to just say how great it is that people are posing questions and we have other folks that are responding to them. So I think it's great that they are helping each other out in the chat. There is a question about, can you provide a soft skill question at an interview followed by a good response? So I think they're looking for what kind of question, a soft skill question?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the ones that comes up quite a bit is how you deal with conflict. And what I love about developing answers to these soft skill questions is they're very malleable. You can use them. You can use a situation you've developed, an explanation of situation, to answer a multitude of questions. So they may say, tell me about your worst customer, or tell me about how you've turned around a customer, or have you ever had to deal with a dissatisfied customer? You can use the same story to answer all of them. And I think that's something we should all have in our back pocket, is how have we dealt with a disagreeable or angry customer? How have we dealt with a coworker who we had a disagreement with, or our boss? Because that's all about conflict resolution. And I think you will find a similar question to something like that in every interview, or many of the interviews you're going to deal with. And the reason they ask that is they want to understand, do you handle these situations professionally or personally? So if a customer comes up to you and says something, like perfect example, and this was just in the news, by the way, with all these masks mandates, and people feel very strongly one way or another. There was a situation in which a actor of some repute in the 80s went to a business and started just berating the guy that was standing there, saying that we still have a mask requirement here. Now, it wasn't the employee's mask mandate, it was the company's mandate. So this person had a camera in his face and he was saying, how dare you, and this is against my civil liberties. And I'm not on one side or the other of that argument, I'm not going to get into that. But the idea is the employee could have handled that one of two ways. They could have been offended, they could have been echoed that or escalated, but they just said, I appreciate that, sir. But it is company policy that we are keeping the mask mandate in effect until such a time as we have a new policy. Went through the steps. That is an example of how you've dealt with conflict. And it's a very current example, by the way. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be using those types of examples to deal with a lot of the questions coming up in interviews as we all start moving towards employment opportunities. And by the way, if you haven't been looking lately, it's not just welding jobs that are really searching for. Employers are really searching for. I checked yesterday and there were 97,000 jobs on the Minnesota Job Bank, and there are 14,000 resumes from job seekers, meaning that this has been the highest instance I have ever seen of a disparity between want or supply and demand. This was totally flip-flopped several years ago when there were 100,000 resumes and 14,000 jobs. Now, I realize there's a lot of variables into that. Not always jobs are the types of jobs you're willing or able to do, but there are jobs out there. If you've been discouraged, now is a real good time to start looking, because employers are willing to train. Skills gaps, employment gaps are nowhere near the barriers they used to be. So that's one positive to take out of all of this. So we're going to talk a little bit about applications. So applications, like everything else, is an opportunity to market yourself. So have your information ready before you start, especially if you're applying in person. And by the way, in-person applications and in-person interviews are happening. I know people have had them last week. Don't assume everything's going to be over WebEx or Skype or Zoom. They do happen. And you are making an impression while you're filling that out. So I'll be sending everyone in the follow along kind of a personal data record that we have that allows you to get the names and dates, and that way you have it. You don't want to ever have to look this up twice. Get the exact dates for public employment, state employment, government employment. Is especially important to have the exact dates because they are very tied to what is proven. So if you say that you worked from 2012 to 2014 in a job that required 2 years of experience, they're not going to interview you. And the reason is you can only prove within those dates that you worked from December 31st of 2012 to January 1st of 2014, which is a year and 2 days, not 3 years. So get the exact dates. Even if you don't use them, you have them. How you get the exact dates is you call your former employer. If you can't do that, then you look at options with the Social Security Administration, possibly. That does cost money, but it's something that hopefully you only have to do once. If you can't get the dates, err on the side of caution, because you want to make sure you're being as honest as possible. If you don't put dates on an application, it can screen you out. If you don't have the keywords from the job posting, it can screen you out. Use the space wisely. Don't assume the person who's looking at your application is the same person looking at your resume. Sometimes it's two totally different people. It's sometimes the HR person looking at your application, and it's the interview panel looking at your resume. I've been in several interviews where they never saw my application. And so when I said some things that, well, I talked about that on my application, they said, well, we don't see that, or vice versa. Make sure you follow directions, be complete, be neat. I can also send, I think I have in the follow-up packed up a sample application. Fill that out so that you're copying some of it over. Every application is different, but some of the main points are going to be the same. So using that personal data record or a sample application could really help you in filling it out. So I'm going to talk a little about this, just fun little exercise, by the way. So don't worry about this. This is an exercise, not a test, but we're gonna try something. Here's the importance of filling out an application correctly and proofreading all the documentation you send out. I want you to take a look at these 4 lines of text, just in the white here. I'm not trying to fool anybody, just in this area right here. Read it through once. Count the number of F's as in Frank that you see. Just count the number of F's as in Frank, and put it in the chat box. How many F's do you see in this white area? Right. See some 3s, see a lot of 3s, see a 5, see a 6, see a 4, see a 7. Now, when you look at this, you might say, how could anyone come up with a different number than I have? This is a simple exercise. We're counting the number of F's. I'm going to let this just go a little bit. So for those of you who saw 3, there are 3. You are right. There are 3. There are finished, filed, and scientific. But for those of you who saw 4, 5, and 6, you're also right. And for many of us, we look at this and we see, well, there's 3 there. I don't see any more. And you'll look at it and you'll look at it and you'll look at it. You say, Art, you're lying to us. There's only 3, until you see the of, and the of. Now, that's just a fun little exercise, but it proves a point. By the way, if you got 6, you got the best answer. Doesn't mean you are never going to make a mistake or never miss anything on here. But for those of you who got 3, make sure that you are really looking at how it reads. You're looking at it objectively. And that's really hard to do with your resume or an application because you've lived it and you know what you want to say. So have someone else look at your resume, at least. That sample application, maybe have someone look at. It's really hard to have someone look at your application each and every time you apply. But once you get some information that you want to transfer over to applications, hopefully it's been proofread. It's very easy to miss things. And remember, at application and in your resume, all I know about you is what I'm seeing. And if I see a mistake, I'm looking at you alongside of 20 other people that maybe didn't make a mistake. You may be the best candidate, but I'll never know because a mistake had an outside say on whether I considered you or not. Now, hopefully, employers are forgiving of little typos here and there, but these are things that we can generally take care of if we put enough work into it. All right. So when you're filling out an application, the really tricky one is reason for leaving. People really get hung up about this. especially right now, because there have been many people who have had a very long work history who are experiencing unemployment for the first time in a long time. And they're saying, oh my gosh, I was laid off due to COVID. And I don't know how to mention that. It was you were laid off. You were furloughed. You're alongside hundreds of thousands of other people with the same story. Employers are desperate to hire people. They know what people have gone through. This is the most forgiving employers have been about long-term unemployment. And by that, I mean year or more since I've been doing this. So if you legitimately were laid off because of maybe the restaurant is cutting back, or the manufacturing plant who provides stuff for a certain industry that was affected by COVID has seen a downturn, they're going to understand. The tricky one is if you were fired. Good people get fired every single day. Okay, it's not a reason for you not to get hired, but how we handle it often prevents us from being hired. So if you were fired, the best term I can give you is involuntary separation. Don't put "will explain in interview." Don't try to validate why you were right and they were wrong. It doesn't matter at this point. Just put involuntary separation and then be prepared to talk about it in the interview if they ask you. Now, I'm going to give you this as an example of when to reach out to your career force location. Everyone's situation is different. Everyone has a story. It's okay to vent to us a little bit and say, they treated me bad and this happened and they hired their brother and they wanted me out. That's fine. And then we'll help to develop a story that explains that situation and then explains why it's not a situation going forward. Because any venting you do in the interview will only hurt you, even if you're absolutely right. And in many cases you are. It's not your fault. But why did they let you go? And was it truly a firing? Did they give you a letter? And a letter, if it says you were laid off, then that's what you put in, even if you deemed it as a firing. It's what they say it is. And every situation is different. It's one of the things that people really obsess over, and I understand why, because it's a very emotional thing. But don't let it prevent you from getting that next opportunity. Just explain it and then move on to what you have to offer. And again, reaching out to your local career force location is the best way to kind of come through that if you're having trouble developing a method for that. I'll be giving everyone the contact information for all 50 locations, email and phone number, so you can reach out. And then before we get on to Lisa's question, when you resigned from a position, if you voluntarily left, then I would give it a little bit more information, because if you just quit, as an employer, I look at that, I'm like, well, did you give a 2-week notice? Why did you quit? If it was a family relocation and you're okay, letting an employer know that, it explains the situation. But then talk about in the interview why you are firmly, embedded here and why this is where you're going to have a long-term possible relationship with a community and an employer. Lisa?
Thanks, Art. There's a lot of questions and a lot of comments. I'm just going to save them for later, at the very end of your presentation, so we can cover them. But there is one, I just wanted the folks to know that we're not ignoring you, and I'm not ignoring you. But there is a question relative to the opening of the career force location. So one of the participants asked if they're physically open.
So we're not currently open. Obviously, things are changing rapidly. I think many states, and Minnesota included, was kind of surprised that there was a quick, abrupt turnaround in face masks and that sort of things. There people are getting their vaccination. I had my second one on Thursday. Not going into the politics of any of that, but things are changing. Things are opening up. I honestly have no idea when we will be open to the public, but we are open virtually, meaning that if you need to have a resume reviewed, you can email it to one of the career force specialists in your local location. By the way, the reason I say local is I live in Twig, Minnesota. I have no idea what the expectations are of specific employers in your area. I don't have connections to employers in your area or resources. So you always want to connect with a local career force location to get the best information. So we're going to move on, because I know there's a ton of questions coming in, but we want to make sure we get through the entire section here. Portfolios is something I'm a real big believer in because it's a way of documenting and collecting your skills for an employer so that at the end of an interview, you can give them a takeaway. So it could include your resume, a copy of your cover letter, a reference sheet. If they don't ask for a reference sheet, you're just giving them one. You're just saying at the end of an interview, I've included a reference sheet if you want to check on any of my qualifications. I've gone as far as to say, I know you haven't asked for my reference sheet, but I did include it in here should you need it. Now you may ask, well, they already have all this stuff. They may not. Not every person in that interview may not. So I bring a portfolio that has a collection of this information. Do I waste some paper by doing this? Sure. But I don't interview that often. I think it's worthwhile to put my best foot forward in every situation. You can also include letters of recommendation. Those are those value added types of things. Now, some of these things can be brought up beforehand if they allow for additional attachments to an actual application. But I generally try to bring a letter of recommendation either to the interview, or if I haven't heard back from them, I'll send it as a follow-up. Don't call us, we'll call you, we'll let you know. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to send, because you're not saying, have you made your decision yet? You're saying, I'm giving you some additional resources to help you make your decision. Also, work samples can be very telling. And work samples can be anything. We think of portfolios as like artists. An artist brings a portfolio of caricatures they've done or landscapes they've done. All of us do work. If you're a welder, I've seen pictures of good welds and horrible welds. If you want to give a sample picture of a weld you've done, oh my gosh, that's proof. That's a proof. You're not saying you did something, you're showing they did something. I've had people put up marketing flyers, or if it were fundraising, maybe they show the results of a fundraising effort they had, like a spreadsheet or something. There's a lot of different things we can have. And then copies of certifications, licensures, whatever. If you put something in your resume and they hire you, you're going to have to prove it at some point. So one of the best hires I ever did gave me a portfolio with all of these things. And it was just a glowing moment for me, because the last hire I had done, they were very truthful on all their documentation, but it took me 6 months to get everything to HR. This person gave it to me before I even hired them. They said, here's the proof of everything I've talked about on my resume. And I was like, wow, that's very organized. That's very thoughtful. That's very professional, which are skill sets that enhance any job. So just something to think about. Also, when you are putting together all of your information, your resume, your cover letter, your reference sheet, think about what branding can do for you. Now, you may have heard this term about company branding, like McDonald's or Nike. They're very specific about their brand, and that's why they reinforce it. Coca-Cola and all these different places. But we all have our brand, and we want to make sure it's consistent. So if this were my resume, if I were John Smith and this were my resume, and I got some help on it, and I made it look as good as I could, and then I put together a cover letter without the help, and they saw this, they're not going to assume they're getting this when I show them this. They're always going to assume the lesser. They're going to say, you had help with the resume. What I'm actually getting is what you're showing me on the cover letter. Now, be aware, this is content. I'm just looking at format. Take whatever format you have for one document and apply it to all your documents. Now, I'm going to go back and forth on that. This content right here and this content right here are exactly the same. It's too small to read, so you wouldn't know that. But the perception, that first immediate perception, is different because one looks more professional. It isn't more work. It's just copying and pasting from one to the other using the same font, the same margins. It can have a better initial impression, so that now I'm willing to look at your skills without any filters. Or maybe I've got a filter, and that is, this is a professional document I'm looking at. Something to think about. I also do this with your reference sheet. I think everything should have a consistent look and feel, because companies are going to have a consistent brand. And so someone who puts out a brand just looks more professional and more organized in many cases. Now, are companies saying we're looking for this? No. But would they notice it? Well, ask yourself, does this look different than this to you? If it does, a company probably would too. All right, we're going to spend the last 6 or so minutes with questions that have come into the chat box. So Lisa, I'll let you kind of take it away here. As Lisa's getting her camera on.
I think I got it. Okay, there's a lot of questions. So I'm going to try to put some of them together. One question, actually a couple of them, is about cameras. Let me go back to that one. Here's a question. How about resumes? There's some folks looking for links to resume workshops. What do you want to say about that one?
Oh, so yes, we do have a resume workshop happening next week. I will include the link to that in the follow-up information to get you right to where you need to go. But if you just Google Career Force from anywhere, that's the Career Force Systems online presence. Just Google Career Force from anywhere. You can find links to all of our workshops, the interview workshops. We do run a resume or interview class every single week, but we also have the additional resume class next week. So there's a resume class going on this Wednesday. I'll include a link in that too. So if you want a quick turnaround on that, but there's an additional one next week as part of our creative job search.
And then there's questions about the camera. So do you still have the interview class where you are on camera and recorded?
Yes. Well, the interview class, we do have a recording. I don't know if that's what they're asking, but there is a recording of that. On the career site, we have links to all our previous workshops, and the interview class is on there. I don't know if that's the question that's being asked. Or are you asking, there was a class specifically we ran that was video interviewing specific, and that is also on the Career Force site. I'll include, well, I'm going to include a lot of things. I better take some notes, Lisa. I'll include the direct link to that one also in the follow-up email.
So there's another one related to that. Do you need a camera for that class?
No, you do not. But here's what I would say. Because a lot of interviews are still going on online, you can use your camera. I know some people that use a camera very effectively on their phone to do video interviewing. Just make sure that you put it on a little, I use this. I'll show you what I use. I don't know if you can see this. I use this little thing I had once used for LP albums. I cut off the album part of it, and it's just perfect for my phone. Having it stationary, they're not going to know if it's a phone or if it's a webcam. Make sure you're practicing with it, though. We cannot practice in a 100-person interview class with cameras, so practice with your friends or take a mock interview at a Career Force location. By that, I mean virtually with a Career Force location. That takes a while to set up, so don't have an interview coming up tomorrow and call a workforce or a Career Force location and say, I need to do a mock interview. That does take some setup to do, but it's worth the effort because we're good at what we practice. And if you've never done an online interview before, sometimes the technology gets in the way of you marketing yourself.
Okay, so this one is related to a resume or interview. Work history. Go back 15 to 20 years. If a company no longer exists, note it after the company name. If the supervisor is no longer there, state retired or no longer with company after that name. That looks like more of a comment.
Yeah, but let me just interject there. You don't have to put a supervisor. You shouldn't put a supervisor on your resume. I go back 10 to 15 years. There are exceptions to every rule you're going to hear. Everyone has an opinion on resume. There's only what works and what doesn't. But what I have found works generally the best is 10 to 15 years is usually sufficient. If you have a very relatable position that's 16 years ago, go for it. The reason we don't go back further than we have to is twofold. One, we don't want anyone to think we're close to retirement age or even consider that. And it's not because of ageism, it's because of return on investment. I'm not saying ageism doesn't exist, I'm sure it does. But from an employer perspective, when I train someone in, I want it to pay off. And I've had many people very honestly tell me, I need a job for the next 3 months. Employers generally don't want to hire someone for 3 months because you train them in, and then by the time they're ready to produce or do whatever, they're retired. In those cases, there are some more temporary work, possibly, If you're in a situation like that, it can be kind of tricky. So you don't want to put out on a resume that we're any older than maybe we need to show. The other thing is, how relevant is work history 20 years ago? If you were a computer programmer 20 years ago, though, that's pretty outdated, and it might not be relevant to your current work history.
How about, do you put company closed next to the name of the company on the resume?
You don't have to do that. Now, if a company was bought out and you want to show the current name of the company, you can put, there's a lot of different ways to do that. If the company was bought out and you want to show longevity, there's ways of doing that. And those specific situations are kind of one-offs, and every situation is a little bit different. So no one is going to write a resume for you. That's not what we're here for. But if you have a work history like that or have questions about that, ask your local career force location representative to take a look at your resume and give them your specific situation. If the company was closed, I generally don't feel a need to tell the employer, potential employer I'm marketing myself to, about that.
Here's another. How are my skills at an interview going to make an impression when I was terminated 2 weeks ago? I'm not confident I will sell well enough. I need help.
Yeah. So again, that's a very emotional thing, and anyone who's gone through a termination is going to be affected by that. The key is to get to a place where you're thinking about, what are the good things I accomplished at that employer? What are some things I've been identified for, maybe in a job review, that, Art is very good at dealing with customers. I might have let him go because he can't get here on time, but I'm not going to talk about those things. I'm going to talk about what I was successful at, what I was proud of, what I had been commended for. I get the emotional part of it is hard to come to terms with. But remember, anything you bring in about the emotional side of it during the interview is only going to detract. So coming to a very firm understanding of how you're going to explain it is the most important thing I can tell you. And don't deviate. Give them enough information that it explains the situation so they don't have to ask follow-up questions, but doesn't leave it open-ended. Because I've had someone go on for 20 minutes on that question, and that interview was over in my mind after the first minute, because all they were doing was talking poorly about their former employer, which they may have deserved, but it doesn't help you in an interview. We'll take one more question, and we'll save the chance to follow up.
What do you do with really old work history, places that don't exist and no longer can track supervisors and no longer with us? I think you addressed that. I do want to ask this one. What is the job board website that Arthur mentioned earlier?
So if you can put it into the, well, here, I can probably just put it in the chat here. It's minnesotaworks.net.
Okay.
It's the same place you use to register for this class. So let me.
I got it.
There we go. So that's the state job board. It's not the only thing. It's the reason I promote it is I'm a state employee, but it's something I've also hired off of. I've hired directly off. I've gotten jobs directly off it, but it's not the only thing I would use. I would use a variety of methods. The number one method I've always used through my career is networking. That eventually is going to lead to me having to apply on a website also, but it gives me an introduction maybe before I apply. Now, there are places like Glassdoor, like Indeed. I'll include links to those also. Whatever works for you. Some people really get a lot of success off Craigslist. Just be a little more careful with that site. Make sure it's an employer that actually exists. On minnesotaworks.net, all employers are verified through their unemployment ID number. So that you are less likely, you shouldn't get any spam from them whatsoever. I get recruiters calling me from Minnesota Works. I have a resume on there about once a month. So it does work, but it shouldn't be the only thing you use. At this point, we are just a little bit over time. Thank you so much, everybody. I will take, I want to just real quick, because I saw it come in here. Do you really need a cover letter? Some employers may not look at the cover letter, but that's an employer. If they allow it, do it. And here's why. If I'm looking at a bunch of qualifications applicants, and 15 of them sent me a resume, and 5 of them sent me a resume with a cover letter, that cover letter gives me more information to work with. Yes, in some cases, you may be wasting your time, but it's never going to hurt you as long as it's put together professionally, and it can only help you. So I always put a cover letter. Do I sometimes feel it's not being read? Yeah, maybe, but that's out of my control. What is under my control is I'm going to give them all the marketing that they allow me to. I'm going to follow through to the extent I can. What happens to it after that is out of my control. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lisa. Like I said, follow-up information comes out by end of the day tomorrow, and I'll try to remember all the links that I promised and all the follow-up material. Wish you the best of luck in your job search, everyone.
Thank you.